Welcome to Stand to Reason's #STRask podcast with Greg Kokel and Amy Hall. I'm Amy Hall, and with me is Greg Kokel.
Greg Kokel.
That's how that works.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Greg. Okay, we're going to start with a question from John. It seems all my answers to skeptics/atheists get the same reply. Probably learned from a book. That's not evidence. How would you reply to that?
Well, I'm not surprised, and because what it displays, I don't know if it's from a book or not, but what it displays is just an unwillingness to countenance realistically and honestly, countenance a view contrary to theirs, all right? I've written about this in Street Smarts, the charge that there is no evidence, and it's just false. Now, there's a difference between evidence and compelling evidence, all right? Let's just say there was a murder, okay, and it happened in a it happened wherever it happened. Excuse me. Turns out I was close by, and I also had a motive, okay? The fact that I was close by and had a motive turns out to be evidence against me. Now, it's not conclusive evidence, but it is a piece of a case that could be made against me. Now, if it turned out that I had, even though I was close by, that I had a powerful alibi, that would overwhelm those particular pieces of evidence. But evidences are pieces that lead to a conclusion, at least potentially. And if the evidence is good and there's enough of it, then you are justified. Preponderance of evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt, they're two different criteria, one civil, the other criminal. But nevertheless, as these things add up, the chances that one outcome was the case and that one individual was probably guilty increases until you're justified by looking at the pieces of evidence as they fit together and coming to a conclusion that more likely than not, preponderance of evidence, that person did it, or yes, he did it beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? So when a person says there's no evidence, sometimes they mean, I'm not convinced by the evidence you've given me. Okay? So the question, I think, at this point would be kind of our standard opener. What do you mean by that? Well, that's not evidence. Well, what do you mean that's not evidence? And that you're basically asking, why would this not be considered a piece of evidence as part of a larger case? And the case that we're usually making is a case that's called abductive reasoning, where we are reasoning from the evidence, from the pieces of information or facts or whatever we can offer to the most reasonable conclusion. So what is the most reasonable explanation given the evidence or the pieces of information that we have regarding this issue? Okay, that's abductive. I'm trying to think of the other phrase that is used, an inference to the best explanation. Okay, so when I say, well, I believe in God and in Christianity because it's the best explanation for the way things are. Then I look at the way things are and I say, here's how the Christian worldview explains that. Why are humans unique? Okay, well, they're made in the image of God. Well, what's wrong with them? Well, they're broken because we rebelled against God. Okay, so we know humans are special. We know that there's something wrong with them. Now, we have a way of explaining that. An atheist can't do either, because there isn't anything wrong if they're just molecules clashing in the universe. There are no standards, for example. And there can't be something wrong with the world, and there can't be something wrong with human beings, per se, because, again, the standard's not there. So the fact that we have explanations to these particulars that seem like obvious details of the world gives us an opportunity to be building a case. So if a person said, well, that's not evidence, well, why isn't it? And I suspect they're going to say, because it's not conclusive. But of course, you don't conclude things generally from one piece of evidence. Most of the time, you are piecing evidential elements together to form a conclusion. Most of the time about just virtually everything. And so what would count as evidence is another question that one could ask. And the answer, unfortunately, the answer is always astronomical. Well, if God would write my name in the sky while I'm standing there looking there, if he'd come and stand in front of me and say, I exist. I mean, it's a ridiculous standard. And as one wag put it, if God stood in front of you, you wouldn't go to God, you would go to a psychiatrist. So this part of the problem here is the standard that's being used by the skeptic. It's unreasonable. What are other things that they believe? I think they believe in Darwinian evolution. Based on what? Well, the fossil record. That's not evidence. DNA. That's not evidence. I mean, we could say the same thing to every point they're making, but what they do to defend evolution is they put together a case based on pieces of evidence that link together that, in their mind, secure the conclusion. This is what we're doing as well. Abductive, an inference to the best explanation. Mm-hmm. Again, the problem here is psychologically, volitionally, an unwillingness to acknowledge any evidence against their view. Anything that could count against their view. That's volitional. And rational is that they are making a demand for proof that they don't make on hardly anything else that's important in their life. Nothing else, except for this one. Okay, so we have a lack of reason in the approach, all right, from the people who are the smart folk, the critical thinkers, the rational people, and are not willing to follow evidence where it leads. They just dismiss it out of hand. And in using an epistemic method, a method of knowing that they would never use for anything else that their life depended on. And that's the issue. So I would ask the question, what do you mean, and get clarification of why they're dismissing this as evidence, and then find out what would count as evidence for them, and then ask them, is this the kind of demand that you make regarding any other important issue in your life? And
including atheism.
And of course, the question could always be asked, what is the evidence for atheism, too? And the fact is they don't produce any. They think it's the default position. But in any event, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
No, I was saying that's not how they treat their atheism either, although I suspect they would say that's the default position, that they don't need evidence for that because that's just the default. But, of course, that's not. I don't want to get too off topic.
Well, they would have to have a reason.
But
they would have to have a reason for it to be the default position, is my point. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, because atheism is not just a lack of knowledge about God. It entails a whole bunch of things about reality and about morality, about the existence of everything, about all sorts of things that require evidence. So they might be under the impression that they don't actually need evidence for atheism. They only need evidence for theism, and that's not the case, which is why, Greg, you're talking about giving different bits of evidence regarding different aspects of reality that all build together to make this case. So I agree with you, Greg, that the best thing to do here is just to ask questions to find out what they mean by that's not evidence, have them define evidence, have them explain why this doesn't count, why it's not enough, all those things, Greg. I think that's great. If maybe even ask
Amy,
them, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to speak to that issue of lacking a belief in God, and this is in my view, an intellectually dishonest cover for atheists. oh, I merely lack a belief about God. Because if they affirm that God does not exist, that's making an assertion which requires a defense. If they just lack a belief about God, then they don't have to defend it. And so this is where they are trying to dodge any burden of proof responsibility. I talk about this in detail in Street Smarts, which, by the way, is available for pre-order already on Amazon. It'll be out in June. So just saying. But I cover this. This is one of the dodges that atheists use. And here's the key to understanding the problem. Yes, they lack a belief in God, but they do not lack a belief about God. Let me say that again. They lack a belief in God. They don't believe in God. But they do have a belief about God. And the belief about God that they have is that he doesn't exist. That's why they're called atheists. And this is why they write books and do podcasts and get in debates. Nobody debates about things they have no belief about. That they have no conviction, no belief, whatever. This is silly. There'd be nothing to write about. I have no belief about the best rugby team in England. I lack a belief because I know nothing about it. All right? They don't just lack a belief in God. They lack a belief in God because they believe there is no God. That's the key. Now, incidentally, if they want to just define atheism as lack of belief in God, then they're welcome to that definition. But there is another definition for atheism, the standard one, the classical one, that also applies to them. So, yes, they are atheists in that they lack a belief in God, their boutique definition, but they are also atheists in the standard sense that they hold a belief that God does not exist. If I were an atheist, I would never go this direction because pardon me, but it just strikes me as so intellectually lame that anybody can see right through this. So I in the book, I have some ways of dealing with that. I explain the problem and then some questions that you can ask the atheist to help them to see that this dodge is not really intellectually defensible.